Okay, so no beating around the bush here. This bad boy is my essential must-watch Halloween guilty pleasure alongside 13 Ghosts, and while it's certainly a very modest effort in comparison to that cocaine-fueled cinematic roller coaster, The Faculty is still one weird beast of a film. It was basically an attempt to be the sci-fi equivalent to what Scream was to slasher movies, but after Scream's writer Kevin Williamson finished the script, instead of handing it to a filmmaker who could complement Williamson's subtle writing style like Wes Craven, Dimension Films decided to put it in the wacky, unpredictable hands of Robert Rodriguez of all filmmakers. And the resulting carnage is a charmingly schlocky sci-fi thriller that is still guaranteed to jack you up. Look, there was no way I was going to get 5 minutes into this video without mentioning the film's most famous quote. Even if I'd argue flogging the bishop is still the most artfully written masturbation line I've ever heard.
Sorry, pal. No more flogging the bishop.
Anyway, despite initially being developed by other writers, The Faculty's existence is pretty much all thanks to Scream, and since the studio felt immediate pressure to throw money at Williamson in the hopes of squeezing another hit out of him as soon as possible, the film ended up with a lot of the same colourful flaws as Williamson's script for I Know What You Did Last Summer. Hell, Williamson was even offered to direct the film, but decided to save his directorial debut credit for his next original project, Teaching Mrs. Tingle, which did not work out too well. And what we got from Rodriguez was naturally this oddball creature feature B-movie that's pretty much a shameless derivative of Invasion of the Body Snatchers meets The Thing, which, if you know my taste, sounds like the perfect science fiction horror love letter. As cliched as it sounds, The Faculty was definitely a product of its time. It has your clunky 90s humour, awkward teen romance, obligatory punk rock track by The Offspring, and horror elements that might not be scary, but were certainly a lot of fun regardless. It even has a pre-Daily Show Jon Stewart, which is very jarring in retrospect. So let's talk about it. The Faculty story follows your typical high school student shenanigans, where a group of teens start to suspect that their teachers are possessed by alien parasites that are taking control of the school and working towards a quiet invasion of Earth, with the film's obligatory nerdy goth chick immediately comparing the situation to Body Snatchers to create the illusion of self-awareness. Along the way, the story also mixes in some hit-or-miss coming-of-age teenage antics and observations, while effectively delivering an escalating sense of dread and paranoia as the invasion fluctuates with uncertainty. As flawed as it is, The Faculty does benefit from Williamson simply relying on familiar pop culture tropes and allowing Rodriguez to playfully indulge on the genre to mask some of its screenplay issues. However, despite being a bit of a rush job to cash in on Scream's popularity and having way too many characters for a story as relatively intimate as this one, the film manages to make its core cast seem fleshed out enough that simplifying them all to distinct archetypes doesn't diminish the efforts that the cast bring to their personalities. You have the kid who's too cool for school, the jock who wants to be an academic, the new girl with a noticeable accent, the awkward nerdy loner, the gothic lesbian who isn't actually a lesbian, the sassy bitch who hope dies horribly, and the black kid with the least amount of screen time. This is all starting to sound very familiar actually. I mean, I guess for its time, these archetypes were only starting to become modern cliches that inevitably didn't age very well, but you can certainly see how Williamson was attempting to subvert them as much as possible like Scream, yet just didn't have the time to make them any more significant. Now, along with Halloween H2O, I remember this being the start of the Josh Hartnett era, where he pretty much began appearing in practically everything and was clearly a much more talented actor than most of the characters he was given to play. I'm convinced if he was more fame-hungry, he would probably have an Oscar nomination by now given his early trajectory, because despite how cold and wooden his character Zeke honestly is, he really has a leading man's presence, even though his character isn't technically leading despite what the marketing material presents. He just sort of naturally assumes control because his swagger and bravado is something that the characters and audience somewhat gravitate towards. I think it's something to do with the fact that he was the definition of what cool was in the 90s, as old as that makes me sound. However, you will absolutely not see any parental or authority figure call him a role model because, aside from him being a repeating senior student, he also manufactures and distributes drugs as a side hustle. Trust me, it becomes a very bizarre plot point later in the film. The same could even be said for Elijah Wood, who was still an up-and-coming actor at the time. Like Hartnett, Elijah Wood manages to break through the generic whimsy of his character Casey, and adds a real emotional depth to the conflict, acting as the main sympathetic driver of the story. The thing about Casey's character is that it feels like the world is already seemingly out to get him from the start, rooting the film in a relatable sense of alienation that extends to most of the other characters. I actually find the jock Stan to be one of my favourites because, as he starts to break away from his tough guy persona, his insecurities feel real and personable. The school and the students have labelled him as this dumb jock whose only talent is football, but he aspires to be more than that, despite how constantly beat down he is. It makes his conflicted teenage angst more understandable. He's trying to escape the school's growing isolation towards him, that he shows genuine similarities to Casey and the goth chick Stokes, who he ends up dating in the end. For all the sci-fi elements, breaking the characters out of their archetypes makes for a more grounded film. It shows these alienated nobodies finding a sort of Breakfast Club unity in each other, highlighting how we're all lost and confused by this world, but still capable of fighting back if we learn to work together. I will say the only odd one out is Delilah, who turns out to be infected long before the group unite anyway, but her arrogance is just so distracting, and when Stan breaks up with her because she's no source of support but rather further belittlement, to see her end up with Casey in the end left a sour impression on me. Really though, it is the teachers that make the film even more compelling because of how genuinely creepy they are, especially Robert Patrick, who more or less is told to play up his sinister performance from Terminator 2. He's established as an aggressive, angry coach who becomes the first host to the alien parasite, turning him into an uncomfortably soft-spoken and compassionate teacher that feels eerily inhuman. I mean, the menacing stares of the possessed teachers are one thing, but it's never knowing how exactly they might strike on characters that heightens the anxiety of the story, specifically when Casey tries to expose that something is wrong and they just stalk him from outside his house. I think calling it creepy is about as scary as it gets, although it's debatable how much of a horror it's actually trying to be, but it does make for some inconsistent tonal shifts, especially when the awkward comedy is forced in. I think the film's most unique concept is how it plays off the authenticity of student-teacher relationships. From my experience in school, teachers can be odd, to say the least. It's difficult to tell if they're being genuine or masking behind a persona, and that's on top of how there's always been this intriguing mystique and secrecy behind the closed door of the faculty lounge. There are plenty of teachers that I can think of that, retrospectively, were socially unnatural in how they interacted with students. I guess it comes down to how teachers have to show a sense of authority and not break character to keep students in line. And it makes the setting of a quiet invasion in a school so perfect because the teacher's weird behaviour is sometimes just, well, normal to most students. I suppose when you consider the coming together of alienated teens to fight against the deranged and threatening teachers and students, it has a sort of subtextual thing going on, like a pulp metaphor that shows us just how figuratively and literally alien the school can be to so many who become hyper-aware of its everyday antics.
Alright, fuck this, I'm out of here.
What the gang later discover is that the aliens depend on water to keep themselves from severe dehydration, and since Zeke produces a powdered drug that contains chemicals that counteract hydration, the film satirically plays against the drugs are bad PSAs, with Zeke's drugs literally being the only weapon that can defeat them, which also feels like the film challenges the conformity of the education system. You know, Pink Floyd's The Wall and all that. I suppose if you really want to push it to its extremity, you could argue that there is a bit of political subtext to it, in that the film has a very rebellious spirit to it, but I didn't personally read it that way. I actually just thought the drug was all set up to this one punchline where the gang go to Zeke's garage and each of them have to prove that they're not possessed by snorting the drug. That's reminiscent of the blood test scene from The Thing, except to subvert the tension, they end up all laughing hysterically from the high that the drug gives them. So to save the day, they basically theorize that they have to destroy the Queen for all of the parasites to stop, and what they discover is that the new girl with noticeable accent was the Queen parasite all along, and after destroying it, the parasites leave their hosts and the day is saved, yada yada yada, a serviceable if unremarkable ending. But here's the thing. Underneath the surface of its quirky alien invasion setup, the faculty is actually fairly sincere. It has a satirical quality regarding the everyday absurdities and unconventional attitudes of school life, and while I think it's got a negative impression on how much we all hate school and how much of a claustrophobic bubble it can be, it does address how we all have something in common. The ending might be positive, but it's not a fairy tale fantasy. The unity of the characters isn't as obvious as them all just becoming best friends in the end. For how short their time is with each other, kind of indicative of how we only know most people in school during a temporary time in life, they still all have an impact on each other regardless of whether they remain close friends or not. In the final moments, they finally feel free from their stigmas, less concerned and anxious about what the school thinks of them, and more focused on moving on with their lives. Even if you don't see it as deep as I do, it's still fun, silly, and not afraid to dive deep into the wild, crazy behaviour to pull out that weird part of life that we kinda just accept as normal. Because honestly, what is normal? Hey everyone, thank you so much for watching. I always love covering cult topics like this one, so let me know your thoughts on the faculty in the comments below, and while you're there, if you enjoy this show, you enjoy what I do here, and you want to support the show, get early access, vote on future videos, get your name in the credits, and get access to our exclusive Discord chat, consider heading over to Patreon, where for just a few dollars a month you can get access to all those features, and help keep the lights on around here, because YouTube is a bit of a dick when it comes to demonetization and all that nonsense, and you never know what's going to happen with the state of this platform. Until next time, follow me on Twitter and Instagram, stay safe, and I'll see you all very soon. Bye!